All right, now we're going to talk about working the mangrove. I showed you how it works underneath the water where the mangrove roots are, that you got to cast real close to them or you're not going to catch the fish. That's when you might want to pitch a weedless or skip it up underneath the roots or something like that so you don't use a lot of lures. Mangroves hold snook, period, but they're really hard to fish. So you lose a lot of lures. In fact, I'll show you my lure kit when we go over to lures. I have so many lures. I get them out of the trees. I very rarely buy a lure. I just get them out of the trees because, people do it and they cast it too skinny where their boat can't get up in there. That's where I get most of mine. But that's a different story. Mangroves hold snook. They hold redfish too. They hold lots of things that we want to catch. But you have to fish the mangroves. You got to fish them all. It's just like working a dock. You don't just work one dock. You work all the docks. Mangroves are the same way. If you're going to commit to mangroves, and mangroves are great at high tide because there's plenty of water up underneath there for the big fish to get up underneath there. You can catch a lot of big snook and big redfish and just big stuff in general under those mangroves at high tide. All up in there. They're all up in there chasing things. And I'm just going to show you the different scenarios on where you especially have to fish. But when you're fishing mangroves, you kind of got to fish the whole thing because they will just work their way through those roots. They will. They'll just go work their way through the roots if they're actually in search mode, or if they got a really good spot where a lot of bait fish is coming, they'll just sit down and wait for the bait to come to them. But I see them mostly cruising. When I see those big snook, they're cruising the mangroves looking for opportunities. And they're going to be just inside the roots or just outside the roots most of the time when they're going down there. So I'm going to show you just a basic scenario on how to fish that. All right, so all this is just your typical, you've seen it a million times, you've been out on the water, a line of mangrove trees. They're just lining whatever it is, a mudflat, an island, whatever it is. They're just thick. They're the only tree there because they're the only one that's saltwater tolerant. So you're going to have red and black mangroves there. And this is what you're going to see, just wall of mangroves. I could put an X every second of this thing because any of the roots on those red mangroves might hold fish. But I really just want to stress that it's an aberration again. So here's a point where instead of a straight line of mangroves, there's a little dip for some reason. Great ambush spot. You got to cast lures up there. If you don't want to just sit around and fish the mangroves all day, you can just fish to the fishiest parts. Anything like that, any little dip in the mangrove, you want to fish. This right here might be a creek mouth. So it's a mangrove lined creek mouth. So the water's flowing in, the water's flowing out. Well, the snook are going to be staged up all along that, waiting for something to come by them. So another great spot. You might want to pass up all these other ones, but you can't pass up creek mouths and you can't pass up these little indentations like that. You just have to pitch to them. Here's another one. Say the mangrove comes around and it ends, and it comes in some sort of little curvy thing right around the end. Well, this point, when the flow's coming this way, there's probably going to be a predator there. You just have to pitch to it. Mangroves are a fishing style of patience. You have to cast here, cast here, cast here. If you're working a mangrove, you're going to cast every 20 feet or so and work that whole mangrove. And guess what? You'll catch a bunch of fish that way too. But it takes a lot of patience, and you have to be very methodical and just keep pitching your lures. Nope, you lost one there. So you better bring a lot of them too, unless you're fishing weedless the whole time. And you better have a stout rod too, because if you actually hook that big fat sow right there, she's going to drag you right up into the mangrove roots and cut you off. So you got to be able to get her out of there. So definitely something I suggest doing, but it's also something that's kind of hard to fish. If you're in a kayak, it's hard to stay steady if you have a current, unless you're just going to fish the current. So you're always stabilizing yourself and things like that. A lot of waders will do this one, where you're wading, you're out here and you're pitching up to them and just walking and wading a whole fishy line of mangroves. And when you have a flats boat, well, they just have a trolling motor, so it's pretty easy for them. They're standing on a deck, just pitching up to them. But mangroves hold fish. They do. As long as, and high tide and low tide, as long as the low tide has enough water underneath the mangroves. Sometimes the tide is so skinny, not even 6 inches deep, so there's not going to be any big snook up in there. So you need some water up in there. I do best around high tide. Or having a lot of tide up in there where a big fat snook can get up underneath there, or a big redfish. But you're going to have to work the entire thing. Like I said, it's just like working the docks. Got to pitch to all these different mangroves, but especially pitch to the fishiest parts.